video, we're going to talk about how to add and subtract decimals. So my favorite way to introduce decimals is with base 10 blocks. So the idea of using base 10 blocks to represent decimals is that you're going to use one color of blocks to represent the whole numbers, and you're going to use another color to represent the decimals. So I'm going to use blue blocks to represent my whole numbers, and you can see that I've got that here because this whole number 12 is represented by these blocks, and this whole number 3 is represented by these blocks. And so those are my whole numbers. And then I'm going to imagine that if I zoom in on one of these blue blocks far enough that I can see it as like a big block, by changing the color to yellow, I'm signifying that it's a zoomed in version of those one blocks. And if I cut one of those blocks into 10 pieces, one of those pieces will be one of these plates. So these yellow plates that I have here are representing 1/10 of this blue block, but it's zoomed in so we can see it. And then if I cut those up into 10 pieces, that makes my hundredths because it takes 100 of these rods to make the big yellow block. And then if I cut those into 10 pieces, that gives me my thousandths because it takes 1,000 of these little yellow blocks to make a rod. To make a big yellow block. So when I'm adding these two decimals together, I'm going to line up all of the decimal places so that the matching decimal places are on top of each other. So I'll write it out like this. And when I add them together, I'm going to say, okay, well, if I have 6 thousandths, there's no thousandths in the other number to add them to. So I'm just going to say 6 thousandths plus nothing equals 6 thousandths. Then when I take these 7 hundredths and add them to my 8 hundredths, which I think I only have 6, so let me add those in there really quick. So there's my 8 hundredths. And then I'm going to have a total of 15 hundredths. And I can regroup some of those hundredths into a tenth because I have more than 10 hundredths. So I'll select all of those and click the button that allows them to regroup. And you can see that that's true. I have 1/10, and then I have these 5 hundredths. So I'm going to say, okay, well, I have 5 hundredths and I have an extra tenth in the 10th column. And then when I add all of those together, my applet here doesn't understand that 10 of these yellow blocks equals one of the blue blocks. So I'm just going to select these 10 that come from adding 3 plus 7 and delete them and add in a blue block. So that's the one piece that my applet doesn't know how to do. And that's because I did my 7 tenths plus my 3 tenths. That gave me the 10 tenths that I just regrouped. And then I also have this 1/10 that was regrouped from my hundredths. So that gives me 1 in my hundredths column. And then I also have an extra 1 in my ones column. And when I add that extra 1 to the 2 ones and the 3 ones, that gives me a total of 6 ones. And the 1/10 doesn't have any other 10s to be combined with, and so I'll just write it right there. And so that shows me that 12 and 376 thousandths plus 3 and 78 hundredths equals 16 and 156 thousandths. And that's how you would show addition with the base 10 block. And then if I want to show subtraction, I just reset it so that I have the correct blocks here. And I have my 12 whole number represented with the blue blocks, and then my 376 thousandths represented with the yellow blocks. And the number that I'm trying to subtract is 3 and 78 hundredths. So when I subtract, I'm taking them away. So if I have 6 thousandths, which are shown with these blocks right here, and I take away nothing, that's going to just be 6. If I have 7 tenths 7 hundredths, and I want to take away 8 of them, I can't take away 8 because I only have 7. So I'm going to borrow from the next largest place value, and I'm going to ungroup these, and I'm going to take away 8 of them. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. and this one should go down there too. So I'm going to select all of these and delete them because I'm taking them away. Now, the way that I'm going to show that on my calculation is I'm going to say, well, I did have 3/10, but now I only have 2 because I took one of them and exchanged them for 10 hundredths. And I had 17 hundredths, and when I took away 8 from that, I ended up with 9 hundredths. And you can see that because I have these original 7 plus this one and this one. And so I have 9 total. Then I can say, okay, well, I have 2 of these and I want to take away 7. So I have 2/10 and I want to take away 7 of them, but I obviously can't do that because I only have 2 of them. So I'm going to take one of these blue blocks and exchange it for 10 of these. So let me just duplicate this really quick. So here's 1, and then I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I don't want to run out of room, so I'll put this over here. And I have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is my 10 that I'm exchanging this blue one for. Because remember, a big yellow block is just a zoomed in small blue block. So I'm going to delete that blue block and exchange it for these 10 yellow blocks here. And the way that I would notate this is I would say, okay, well, I'm borrowing a whole number, which leaves me with just one whole or 1, and I'm exchanging it for 10/10, which gives me 12/10. And we can see those here because I have 10 right here and 2 right here. And then I'm going to delete 7 of them. So this is a group of 5. So I'll just go ahead and select those and delete those, and then delete these 2 as well because that will delete 7. And that shows me that I have 5/10 left. Then I can move on to my next place value and I can say, okay, well, I have 1 and I want to take away 3. Well, I can't take away 3 if it's just a single 1. And so I'll exchange these 10 blocks for 10 ones. Whoops, I must have accidentally duplicated it instead of ungrouped it. I think. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now they're ungrouped, and now I can take away 3 from it. So when I take away those 3 and I delete them, the amount that I have left is 8. And that is showing that I'm borrowing from the tens column, which makes it a 0. The ones column now has 11, and when you do 11 minus 3, you get 8. And so 12 and 376 thousandths minus 3 and 78 hundredths equals 8 and 596 thousandths. And that's how you can use base 10 blocks to add and subtract decimals. So this is my favorite way of modeling the addition and subtraction of decimals because it's basically just an extension of what the students are already used to with whole numbers. So this is my favorite model. And but there are other models that you can use as well. So one of the other approaches you can use when adding and subtracting decimals is to look at it in fraction form. So if we were to convert these decimals into fractions, we would look at the last decimal place and we would say, okay, that's the 10,000ths place. So I'll put a 10,000 in the denominator. And then I'll write the digits in the numerator without the decimal point. And that's kind of the shortcut way of converting a decimal into a fraction. And in previous videos, we talked about how to do that. So I'm not going to go into detail about why that works right here. For the second fraction, the last digit is in the thousandths place. So we'll put 1,000 in the denominator. And then we'll put all of the digits in the numerator. Now, before we can add these fractions together, they need to have common denominators. So if I look at my denominators of 10,000 and 1,000, the least common multiple is 10,000. And I can make the second denominator be a 10,000 by multiplying the top and the bottom by 10, which basically just adds an extra 0 on the end. Then when I add the numerators together, and I do 26,301 plus 41,580, I get the number 67,881. And that's all over the common denominator of 10,000. Then I can just convert that back into a decimal. And I can say, okay, since my denominator is 10,000, My last digit will go in the fourth decimal place because that's the 10,000ths place. And so I'll put a 1 there and then just fill in the rest of the digits before that. And that gives me my answer, which is 6.7881. And if we look at the original problem, that seems reasonable because 2 is about, or 2.6301 is around 2, and or 3 if you round up. And then 4.158 is close to 4. And 2 plus 4 is going to be about 6. And notice that 6.7 is a little bit closer to 7 than it is to 6. And that is also reasonable because this you could estimate by rounding up to say that it's 3 plus 4, which means that your answer should be close to 7. So that's how the fraction approach works. You would do something similar if you were going to subtract your decimals. So I'm not going to go through this example, but basically you would do the exact same thing, just instead of adding the numerators, you would subtract them. And then the last method is the place value approach. And this is actually basically what I did on the base 10 block slide. But once your students have done it with base 10 blocks for a while, then they can move on to just doing it with the place values. So if they were adding these two decimals together, they would say, okay, well, I have 110, two ones, then a decimal point, 6/10, 7/8, or 700ths, excuse me, and 8 thousandths. Then we are adding this to 4 ones, 5/10ths, and 300ths. And we just want to add these together. So it's basically what we did with the base 10 blocks, except you're not showing them the picture version of it. So you'd say, well, if I have 8 thousandths plus nothing, that's just 8 thousandths. 700ths plus 300ths is 10 hundredths, which you can regroup or like simplify to be 1/10. And so I'll have 0 hundredths and 1 extra 10th. When I add that extra 10th to the 6/10ths and the 5/10ths, I get 12 tenths. So I'll have 2 tenths in my tenths column, and then 10 of the tenths will be converted into a whole number. And then I can add that whole number to my 2 and my 4 whole numbers, and that gives me 7 ones. And then my 110 doesn't get added to anything, so that just stays the same. I'll put a decimal in my answer to separate the whole numbers from the fractional numbers, and that's how you would use the place value approach. So it's essentially what I did on the base 10 block slide, but you can let your students graduate from the base 10 blocks once you feel like they have a good understanding of what's happening. So that's how you add and subtract decimals. If you have any questions, let me know.